I'd like to begin with a quotation from Megan McKenna, a Roman Catholic laywoman who writes about spirituality. In Genesis, we read that we are made in the image and likeness of God. Each person is created singularly, uniquely, reflecting something of God in their person. But when minting coins, a ruler makes all the images exactly the same. They are flat representations of himself. When Jesus asks for the coin and poses the question, whose image and inscription is this? They respond with Caesar's name and image. The coin belongs to Caesar, but the person belongs solely to God. If we ever needed to read and hear lessons as if they were meant directly for us, it is now. Today's gospel selection from Matthew is just about the perfect text for us to reflect upon, so close to a national election, and on the day that Bishop Stokes has declared as Diocesan Stewardship Sunday. In Matthew's gospel, we are reminded that we must persist in our pursuit of righteousness and justice, especially in times such as now, which seems to challenge Jesus' great commandment of love of God and love of neighbor. In today's text, we hear about a scenario that we have encountered on numerous occasions in political campaigns, trying to trap an opponent, in this case Jesus, in a lose-lose situation with a question about paying taxes. From the story presented in the text, paying taxes was not any more popular in first century Palestine than it is today. The question asked by the Pharisees and the Herodians, who usually were opponents of each other, while short and pointed, is controversial. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? If Jesus answers yes, then he could alienate his Jewish followers, who might perceive him as colluding with Rome in the oppression of the Jews. If he responds no, he might be seen as an enemy of Rome. But Jesus proves himself an astute opponent by asking to see the coin used to pay the tax. When his opponents provide the denarius, Jesus has already given those present in the temple and observing this exchange a number of issues to consider. The coin has an image of the emperor and an inscription proclaiming his divinity. By creating an awareness of his opponents possessing the coin and displaying it within the temple grounds, Jesus raises for the audience the issue of blasphemy, as the inscription asserts the divinity of the emperor, and of idolatry, as the image of the emperor is on the coin. When the image on the coin is identified as the emperor, Jesus seems to settle the question presented to him with a neat one-liner response. Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. At first reading, Jesus' response seems direct and to settle the issue. But the more we reflect on it, the final clause, and to God the things that are God's, places a looming question before us. Doesn't everything belong to God? We hear throughout the Hebrew scriptures how everything is God's. The earth and all who live in it are the Lord's. We are thus reminded of the sovereignty of God in a world with so many distractions that the power of God is often easily pushed to the periphery of our consciousness. In declaring this Sunday Diocesan Stewardship Sunday, Bishop Stokes asks us to focus on our responsibility to one another during the COVID pandemic. In his message to clergy, requesting that we preach on this theme, the bishop states, I invite us all to pray and reflect upon our roles as stewards of God's mystery, to give thanks for all that God has entrusted to us, and to consider how God is calling us to live more deeply into our role of being stewards in this strange new COVID-19 landscape in which we all now find ourselves, and in which we are still called to carry out God's mission of reconciliation and love. From a theological perspective, stewardship is the belief that humans are responsible for the care of the world. For many, when stewardship is spoken about in church, people get ready to pull out their checkbooks. And certainly financial support for the ministry of the church is essential. But stewardship is also about ownership and control. Who really is the owner of what I have? Who is in charge of my life? To whom do I give the highest allegiance, the greatest devotion? Where do I expend my greatest energy? Not just in words, but in actions. It should also be noted that at the core of stewardship is gratitude, recognizing what we have been given and being thankful, a sense of having been gifted that transforms us into action. So today's gospel and the bishop's statement challenge us to ponder those more difficult questions of allegiance, righteousness, love for one another, and reconciliation and healing in a world made ill by disease, both physical and political. How are we to be good stewards in a time of such political divisiveness, and with so many people playing God and speaking for God? But the self-serving actions of human leaders should not lessen our commitment to serve God through serving our neighbors, especially the sick, the poor, and the persecuted. If we identify certain things as essential to our lives, things such as adequate housing, nutritious food, good education, health care, access to honest work and a decent living wage, then to be faithful stewards, we must certainly claim these things as essential for everyone, even if that means that we do with less in the way of extras in order that everyone might have them. In the same way, if we count freedom to worship, freedom of movement, and respect of the rights of individuals as basic and essential to our lives, must we not claim them as essential for every human being? And if we do make this claim, which as Episcopalians we do every time we profess our baptismal covenant, what are we willing to do? What are we willing to strive for in making such things real for all our brothers and sisters? Perhaps at the very least, we must be willing to raise our voices when we see these essentials being denied to others. Imagine for a moment how our world might look and function if our leaders, and us, were less engaged in the pursuit of counterfeit gods, such as money, material things, power and control for our own gain, and lived as if we had faith in God's all-encompassing rule. What a power shift that would cause. As you can't claim God has all authority and then act as if you do. We must believe and then behave as if God's sovereignty and loyalty to the people is indeed true. In our work in the world, we must act upon what we profess in our church buildings. Our first allegiance is always to spreading the good news of God's all-encompassing reign, that God's sovereignty is never in question. As Bishop Stokes stated in his message regarding Diocesan Stewardship Sunday, so our highest obligation in life, and one that is imposed on every man, woman, and child, regardless of nationality or citizenship, is to give ourselves back to God. Our participation in the life of the church and of our congregations, our gifts of time, talent, and treasure, are really a return to God of what God has first given us as grace and gift. The bishop continues, "What is ours that does not first belong to God? Nothing. Literally nothing. We are God's stewards, God's trustees. Everything we have, everything we are, including ourselves, our own bodies, is given to us by God as an act of grace. We hold it in trust for God. God and God's love calls us to use it all for God's own purposes, the spreading of God's love and the building of God's reign." So, in today's world of disease and political uncertainty, where power is exerted without empathy and control without compassion, challenges to our commitment to a belief in our loving and powerful God are an almost daily occurrence. Therefore, that belief must not be a choice, but an undeniable truth and a statement of reality. Holy One, all that we do and all that we have flows through you. Now we ask for just one thing. Give us grateful and generous hearts so that we may spread your love and build your reign. Amen.